If I may, I want to switch gears for a moment to the crisis part. Again, I'm going to reference this. It's on the website, on the Social Media Influence website, where Matthew and I, with the work that we were doing with a former client with Custom Communication, we saw this thing again that we'd never seen before when we were in the newsroom. It was an interesting development in a negative story that the mainstream media had largely missed. Got picked up by people who were new watchdogs, activists out there, and there are many of them now. And it just kept moving, the momentum, until then the trade press picked it up. And then when the trade press stopped talking about it, because there really was very few developments, then there was the murmuring classes of those who were interested in it. To them, in the news industry, timing is everything. If you miss the news cycle, you really can't get into a story. It doesn't exist these days with the social media sphere. People can jump in on a story because it's relevant to them, so they can bring this story forward. And then it picked up, it literally pulled the story from, we had some activists, then we had, it caught the interest of the trade press. Then more bloggers found out about it, and the next part picked up the mainstream press. And then even more people found out about it. So it just kept building and building and building. That's what they call a blog storm. And for the brand involved, there was a number of tremulous moments. When do we go and say something? When do we we don't want to highlight this. So there becomes this moment you have to say to yourself, we have to say something, but when? And I want to ask the panel, when do you say something?
I think the problem is, people don't know when, and they don't know what's going on, because it all starts with watching what's going on online. Take the HSBC versus Facebook example, which is one of the biggest. I know that there were people out there looking for any spikes in activity on Facebook groups just to be able to talk about Facebook trends at that time. And when they saw this trend happen, they just called a bunch of journalists and said, oh, do you want to see the big thing on Facebook today? There's a big anti-HSBC campaign. And it exploded. And I'm not saying that were HSBC to have seen that group when it was only a few hundred people and contacted them and asked them in to do a focus group and maybe address the problem before it got big, that anything would have changed. But that's the kind of mentality that a lot of brands, and I'll say this, not in a bad way, but it's just part and parcel of having so much to try and digest out there online. A lot of brands don't know there's a crisis bubbling until it's a little bit too late. And being able to just set up getting a monitoring agency in just to make sure that you're being fed the information so you can see things happening before it gets too bad, that's the basics. If you rewind 5 years, the basics was getting press clippings in the Post just to make sure you're seeing what the press is saying about you. So times have changed, and there's a need to actually look and see what's going on, because we can't make that decision when do you step in, because we just don't know what's going on a lot of the time.
I would absolutely agree with that, and I think one thing that I thought with the Facebook story was actually one of the big issues there was the fact that it was not. I think HSBC's comms strategy there wasn't very well thought through. There were students who were getting letters that were arriving a week before the change was going to be made. Their terms and conditions say they should get a month's notice of any change to the accounts. Suddenly, people were really, genuinely very angry, and the fact that it was being focused by, I think it was an NUS senior person to kind of use Facebook as the vehicle for that. Well, Facebook was just the delivery mechanism. The fact is that the comms strategy in that instance didn't succeed. So with any of the kind of crises that you're talking about, there is a question of, is there actually an issue within the comms strategy or the brand activity that's actually triggering that? And how do you address that, which is a much bigger issue than actually the kind of public perception, if you like. But I think that, just again, going back to that example, your point absolutely right, Drew, about monitoring, understanding what's going on, and then you can have an informed opinion about what you're going to do about it, because you have to listen to those conversations before you can then react.
If I may just add 2 cents worth to that. I agree with absolutely that many people, I think, don't realise how fast things move online. And it reminds me of a conversation I had about a month ago with a company and on the topic of crisis communication. And we were talking about the crisis communication plan they have in place. And indeed, the crisis plan and the crisis communication plan, what do they do when X happens? And nothing was in there in relation to any social media whatsoever. And they've now done that. And my suggestion is practice it now. So my tip would be, if you've got a crisis communication plan, now's the time to look at it again to make sure it's actually keeping up with the changes that are happening. I mean, is Twitter monitoring, for instance, in there somewhere? Is that something you're doing? Monitoring. There's so many tools out there that help you. Again, which I think is important to note, that all of this adds to the stuff you've got to pay attention to. And yet there are more and more tools out there that automate the process that makes your life very easy. I mean, I learned one today, that brand tag page. I didn't know about that. That's neat. That definitely would be something I'd be paying attention to on brands. So crisis communication, you've got to look at your plan and make sure it's up to date.
I want to have a quick follow-up, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, to the delegates. I wanted to ask Keith this question because this is something that Matthew and I have also had conversations with our clients as well, where this conversation is happening, where companies would prefer that they have their own forum. This discussion is happening online already about their brands. The idea would be, though, you either bring it under your own tent and can watch it from a place that you can see this all happening, or you let it happen in all these various communities out there. What we've seen in the financial world is all of these forums like Money Saving Expert. People are going on there and having very impassioned discussions about all the things that are really important to them, their money. And we don't have the banks have allowed this to happen outside. They may not be able to bring this under their own tent, but GM is a great example. Somebody who brings this forum inside. And has it helped you avert surprises in your day, for instance?
I wouldn't say avert surprises. I think the advantage that it's provided is that you have your own forum and your own space where you can, to use the expression, steer the conversation more because it's more on your terms. We launched an executive blog in Europe just within the past 2 weeks, which is called Driving Conversations, because we wanted to have a forum where we would have the opportunity to put our side of the story when we felt that it wasn't being represented fairly. Not that we wanted to use it for spin or anything like that, but sometimes your story doesn't quite get interpreted in the right way, or it gets interpreted unfairly, and then you don't really have the right of the recourse. And while it's important, to engage in other forums and other communities, I think we find that having that blog has enabled us to have some very, very important discussions and influence. A particular example is with the Fastlane blog in the US, when we were having a little bit of trouble with the New York Times on a particular editorial piece, an opinion piece, and we tried to respond to this, and there was an email discussion happening between the New York Times and GM, and it was clear that they had taken a particular stance, and we weren't allowed to use certain words, and and so on. And we put that whole email conversation on the blog, and and we got quite a lot of credit for that because we stood up to big media, which in the past we probably wouldn't have done. So I would say it is important to have your own forum. It's not an easy decision to make, but there are benefits in actually doing that.